Hello, and welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I'm Carl Christensen. I'm joined this evening by Cameron Christensen, Katie Christensen, Katie, welcome back to the podcast. You've been here once or twice before, but welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Katie's knowledgeable on many subjects. So she's talked before, I think, about certainly photography and maybe art. I don't remember, but yeah, Katie's got a wealth of knowledge. She's going to talk a little bit. But we've also got first-time podcast guest Sam Andersen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So Sam is an HR professional, HR director at Swire, Coca-Cola, and Sam's got a lot of HR knowledge as well, so we're excited today to be talking about the basics of human resources. So I guess I should, before I start throwing HR around, human resources, and I think everyone's first thought, of course, Sam and Katie's, is Toby. So what
I was
are
going to go
you
Dilbert.
like? Well, I mean, there's a lot, but Toby's like the most currently relevant. So Sam, or is that appropriate? Or are you like Toby? Is everyone like Toby?
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that you start this episode out, Carl, with the background kind of theme music of The Office, because for one, it's one of my favorite shows. Two, I typically introduce myself as my profession is like Toby from The Office, and that show is just a great example of what not to do, right, in HR. So it's a funny question, and I would say no. Obviously, that show is really funny, but the reality is HR has, and we'll probably get into this, but HR has evolved a lot over the past several decades from being quite your kind of personnel and compliance gatekeeper to being an enabler of business strategy. And so depending on the size of the company and the maturity of the HR function, it can kind of be anywhere in that spectrum. And so I'm excited to kind of share some insights, having been on multiple sides of that equation.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, jokes aside, as far as like Toby and the HR, like I know for myself, like we all have some exposure to HR in our companies, and so like, you know, I love the caricature of Toby, but I think I'm interested to get a little bit more in-depth vision of what like HR is. So Sam, you've been in HR for a long time, right? That's your profession. You've done that for a number of different companies now. And Katie, you have been teaching human resources. Could you give me a little background on what your role is in the HR kind of scene right now?
So I work for a program called the Remote Online Initiative. We're with Utah State University as part of the extension offerings. And what our goal is to promote and elevate remote work in the state of Utah. And so for the past 3 years, I've been working with HR professionals in Utah, but also throughout the nation to just help them do remote work a little bit better than they were doing it before. If there's one thing that we learned from COVID, it elevated and sped remote work up the equivalent of 40 years. The projections that the economists were showing showed that we weren't supposed to hit where we are today until about 2060. And so we are very far ahead of where we were thought to be. And when everybody closed down in 2020, we learned very quickly that there was a real lack of knowledge on how to lead remote teams. And that was something that we heard repeatedly from human resource professionals that they needed a little bit of help with. How do we run remote teams? How do we bridge the gap between return to office mandates and what our employees want and things like that? So for the past 3 years, I've been working with HR professionals, and I'm actually flying out tomorrow to present at the Public Sector Human Resources Association National Conference on remote work in HR.
Very nice. Okay, great. Well, that'll be. I mean, remote work is one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about for sure. But let's start with a little bit about just kind of what the main responsibilities of an HR professional are. So Sam, what you've worked at now various companies. Does that question make sense? Are there specific main responsibilities or?
There are, and like any function of a business, it's very, very broad. But I would say the traditional responsibilities of an HR department is to manage risk in a way, right? Risk around everything from really in employment law, risk, equity and fairness with employees. And that's at its very, very foundation is ensuring that the workplace treats its employees fairly and equitably, that there's equal opportunity. But then beyond that, as a foundation, HR can be all the way to identifying leadership capabilities for future leaders, as the business evolves, right? And so there's this really big world of HR and everything in between. But I would say at its core, HR is ensuring that the workplace is fair and equitable, that there's equal opportunity for all who are employed there, that and more today, as the shape of the workforce changes, HR can play a pivotal role on helping leaders navigate that. Remote work is a great example that Katie references. Remote work, to working with different generations of employees, to identifying what are the motivators for high performance today versus 20 years ago, right? Things really, really change. And so a dynamic HR function can help a leadership, help management navigate pitfalls and be progressive, and see around those things.
Well, I feel like the exposure that someone like myself, a layman, that we get the exposure of HR, that like they're they're there when you get hired. They are organizing the company parties, and then they're there when you get fired.
Yep.
But like you said, it's a much bigger picture thing, right? And that's kind of the evolution that you're talking about as well, right?
Yeah. So life and death of an employee, right, is where HR is just there, welcoming you and then burying you at the end. And so the HR world is fascinating, right? You have parts of HR that are really specialized, right? Say the world of compensation or executive compensation, and finding the right mix of long-term incentive and equity, and what our value proposition is for our employees, on what percentage of the market we're always going to pay at. That's a whole science. You've got a lot of specialties within HR. Benefits is another example, right? Managing vendor relationships with large global benefit providers and identifying the math of what the business is going to shoulder in terms of cost and what the employees are going to shoulder. And every year going through open enrollment, there's a whole world behind that curtain before you click on the benefits that you and your family are going to select every October, November. Then the other side of HR is more of a generalist side, where you kind of are the tip of the spear for the function. You're typically embedded in an actual business unit, and you're supporting their vision or their strategy. So an example of that might be supporting an engineering function, right? And actually being the HR rep embedded as almost part of a team for all things HR. And if it's something we can't solve, then we go back to those specialist groups to get the insight and bring that back to the business. We know what the business's long-term goals are, and we're always trying to toe that line between kind of the policy side and then what is the business trying to solve, and kind of putting on that hat of I'm now part of the business. I know what their 3-year and 5-year growth plans are. I know what the skills are that we don't have, that we need to have as part of our long-term path. And I get to help the leader decide, do we build, buy, or rent that skill, right? So it's a whole different side of HR than is kind of your specialist, very niche, almost scientific, academic HR. So often, excuse me, often large companies have a mixed model of a centers of excellence, or kind of your core specialist groups, and then they have representatives out in the business units that act as part of those teams. So my role with Swire Coca-Cola is I'm an HR business partner for multiple corporate functions. So I sit on executive team, part of the executive teams that I support. I'm in their meetings daily, weekly. I know what their goals are. I know what their challenges are. I take that back to the core HR structure and kind of act as that intermediary to ensure that we're moving forward on the business goals.
Okay. So you'd say that a big part of your job is, currently, like you said, you're at Swire Coca-Cola, a large company, right? So you can have this more niche role of being able to look at the big picture and really trying to be able to fill the need of long-term growth, right? From a human resources point of view.
Right. And depending on the size of company, you might be a catch-all HR person, right? And so one of the roles I had actually while in California was I was sent out as a rotation with a 300-person manufacturing company, as they were a non-integrated, recently acquired company. So they were not on the same benefits, not on the same systems. Everything was different. And I was essentially taking point as HR at this facility for this company. And so I was the leave of absence person. I was the payroll guy. I was the Toby, right? I was the strategic HR business partner, and I was the hiring, onboarding, recruiting, and firing person. And there are benefits to that because, there's not a lot of red tape in that model. Decision rights typically go right up to that person, and you can be fast. But the challenge is you often can't go as deep in a subject matter, right? You're limited because you're stretched and you're wearing multiple hats. And so, yeah, it really depends on the size of company that you're at. And often companies have to choose, what do they keep in-house and what do they outsource, right? Just depending on the size of company, they might say, you know what, it's cheaper to outsource payroll, right? It's cheaper to outsource recruiting. Often these repeatable, tactical administrative tasks in HR, which is a good chunk of the HR function, they're starting to be outsourced, actually. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but AI is having a role in that, and technology transformations is having a role in that. And so finding the niche in HR that's kind of invaluable is really important for HR professionals looking forward in the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's certainly something I want to talk about, because I feel like AI is disruptive in like every field that's out there. So that's something that I wanted to talk about. But Katie, I was going to ask you a little bit about so Sam was talking about some of just the variety of jobs and niche areas that HR people can work on in. I know that your background, obviously, with management and a variety of other things, like what do you see as like kind of the core, responsibilities and what kind of training do you need to have to be a successful HR professional?
So all of my experience, like as far as management and running, like being part of an HR department, when I worked for the Arizona Theater Company, I was the human resources assistant. And I remember going in my first day I'm fresh out of grad school. I didn't study HR. I had no idea what I was doing. And I went in to meet with my boss, and she had a sign on the wall. And it said, "You can't please everybody. You're not pizza." And she said, "The first lesson I'm going to teach you in HR is that you live by that sign. You can't please everybody. You're not pizza." And so like for us in those small organizations, we were the catch-all. We were, like he said, we were the ones that were like, well, we don't have a 1099 for this person, or we haven't checked to see if this person is legal to work in the United States, or we were a Lort B theater company, which is an elevated status, which means that everyone that we hired had to be employed by the actors union. They had to be part of Actors Equity. And so that added a whole other layer of issues. So our human resource team was broken into three. So we had a payroll and benefits, human resources side, which was a lot of paperwork, a lot of processing, onboarding, and then we had a contracts side of things. As I have progressed and worked for larger companies, like Utah State University is a huge company. And so as we get into those bigger models, it does become more specific, and it's easier to stay in your lane and do your job. I feel like there's a lot of drama that can come with HR too. And maybe that's just because I was working for theater companies. And so it was so much drama all the time.
Yeah.
But like as I've been working with these other companies, whether it be small or large, in teaching, one thing that they have all pretty universally said is that we want to be the middleman to bridge the gap between our C-suite executives and our team on the very base level, because that is the only way that some of these C-suite executives are going to know what is happening in a day-to-day workplace. That is the only way that they're going to know what their employees want. And they're the ones that are really asking and trying to do right by the employees in a lot of ways. It does become a lot of, back and forth and wanting to do what's best for the company, but also to retain employees, because it costs a lot of money to onboard and train somebody. So that is like where my HR experience has been. And obviously Sam has more experience because all I've ever worked with is smaller organizations. And then in teaching, I've worked with some bigger organizations, but all of them have a breakdown of different levels of HR that have gone through the course. So
yeah, that's super interesting, and just the variety of backgrounds people come at it from. Like you said, you kind of had to jump into HR without the specific knowledge that you need to have, but kind of just jumped in with both feet. And I have another question along those lines, but before I do that, and this is what Cameron as well, but we talked about Toby at the beginning. Is there like a movie? Is there any type of like HR, character that is like either accurate or like the hero in something? Like it seems like HR people are often like these punchline type of background, interesting aside. But like I was thinking for my profession, I'm a software engineer, and you'll get they're like the pegged as always like the nerds, right? They're the ones that are hacking away on their computers. I studied linguistics in college. Like there's the movie Arrival, which is like the one movie ever where like a linguist is like the hero. But is there any like HR like, oh, that HR person saved the day here?
There is not a single movie where HR saves the day.
I was going to say, I think the closest that you get to HR saving the day is Leslie Knope in Parks and Recreation, and she's not even necessarily HR, but that I think is the very closest you get to that. And even then,
yeah,
it's a far
I love Parks and Rec. I struggle with Leslie Knope. So no, you could argue that. I think no, that's a funny question. I don't know that there is one. And the reason why is because traditionally HR has been the policy police and the gatekeeper to a process, right? Carl, maybe your interactions with HR has been they're sometimes the unfortunate means that you have to go through to get approval on something, and that's it, right? You want to get a raise for one of your hardworking employees? Well, you have to go and partner with HR, and they've got to, or pick your, pick your gate or your policy. And, that's what they've been. And so they've evolved from this like personnel department, right? A lot of what Katie talked about is what small companies are still kind of evolving from, which is you've got to have someone doing your employment verification. You've got to have someone doing your drug and alcohol testing. You got to have somebody doing your authorization to work in the U.S., right? And kind of your paperwork and all these different things. It's evolved from being this, and someone's got to do payroll, right? So you've evolved from this very personnel heavy, almost ominous, like I have to work with these people, right? To a model where executives now in companies that HR has kind of evolved in their maturity, where they don't want to make a business decision without consulting their thought partner in HR, right? It's or HR's analytical prowess has moved so much where they've got that ability to assess and power data visualization to make really informed predictive decisions about employee trends. So such a modern, finally, HR function. And so because of that, HR is typically projected in that like Office Space or like The Office or Delbert, like policy gatekeeper. Yep.
Right, which doesn't often lend itself to be a hero, but
they're great sidekicks. Like HR is a great sidekick. Not that they should.
Right, for sure, exactly. Yeah, Cameron.
All right, I thought of one. I'm not sure if they're the hero, but Up in the Air is a movie all about HR professionals firing people. But
they're the bad guys. I don't know that one.
I don't know. It's a cloony movie.
I think that Anna Kendrick's character at the end of that movie would argue that they are. I don't think that they're heroes. I think they're bad guys. But
yeah, it's true. I've shut down like full facilities. The business makes the decision, we're going to shut down a production site, right? There's 200 people at these sites. I'm in meetings for 2 months with security and legal, ethics, and the senior leadership. I get to take 200 packets along with the security guard to the site and deliver the message and close down a facility. Like, it's a tough job. And so your comment about Up in the Air, like, it's this depressing, like, heavy sometimes load that HR people carry, because they are the voice in times, right, when hard decisions are made. I'm often the one that is, the business leader gives maybe a 15-second speech that's wrote and basically says, as a result of, blah, 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 it's been decided, every indirect, buzzword you can use, that the facility is going to blah, blah, blah. And Sam's here, and he's going to tell you all about what actually is happening and what happens next, right? And so in front of 200 people, I've got an hour, and then I've got a personal one-on-one, and then I take every call, and I navigate all of the claims. And it's a unique, challenging role, and a heavy one. And I will never forget the first person that I fired ever. And to this day, now hundreds, like literally hundreds later, maybe 1,000, right? I still get a pit in my stomach, because you're impacting a human being, and you're and you just know it's hard for them. And I think I remember one leader early on in my career said to me, like, you're going to have to be the voice of the company and process a lot of these. And if it ever gets easy, you're not in the right career. And I appreciated that perspective. Like, if this ever gets mundane and just easy for you, then this is not right for you. Like, an effective HR person is able every single time when a company has to make hard decisions. They have to, right? Companies have to downsize to remain viable.
Right.
And HR's got to be able to maintain a human element and handle those things individually, one by one, every time. And it's caused for lots and lots of sleepless nights.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I was in my role as software engineer. I've been a couple times involved, not as the HR rep, but as the person sitting in the room with the HR rep who has to do the explanation. But I'm just sitting there because I'm the manager over that engineer, and it's so uncomfortable for me, and I'm not even having to talk. So,
Yeah. You
Yeah,
know, and
rough.
and I think that when you do that, like when you can leave that human element in things like that, it it makes your company culture stand out more. Like during COVID, Better.com fired 900 employees on a Zoom call.
Yep, I remember that.
Literally, the CEO got on there and said, "If you're on this call, you're in the unlucky group. You're being terminated effective immediately." And it was, yeah, I mean, it made national news. It was not a great look for that company, and I would hope that their HR director was going, maybe we could have done this differently. Maybe we should have done this differently.
Their HR director should have been fired. That's what should have happened.
Right?
Yeah. Wow. That's good insight, Katie. Okay, so another question that I know Sam and Katie, you've both been talking about, like all the different responsibilities that HR has to deal with, and a lot of these are very legalistic, right? Like make sure that you comply with this law, make sure that we're not, our hiring practices are equitable, and what all. A lot of this has to have legal advice with it, right? Do you
Yeah.
work closely, Sam, with a legal advisor? And then Katie, I'll follow up with you after that.
Yes. So in my role, actually, Carl, when I was there in California, close to you guys, I had 7 states that I was overseeing, and every single state has a different legal landscape, right? Your Washington, Oregon, typically following suit of California, Colorado's closely behind. Then you've kind of got Arizona in the mix there, and then Utah and other states that are quite far the other, truly at will versus the burden being on the employer. And so, yeah, there were many situations where I needed to consult, and large companies often will have an in-house kind of ethics or in-house counsel that's kind of dotted line into HR, but not all the time, because some states are so niche that I'd hop on calls with kind of third-party legal teams that were in the states that we just contracted with, and probably spent a lot of money in California in particular navigating that, and was deposed multiple times for different lawsuits that I was named in as a result of terminations that I processed, that I managed. So yes, I think you start to kind of understand the legal landscape enough to navigate, and that's a lot of your time is coaching leaders on how to avoid and navigate around things. And so a leader might feel totally justified in firing an employee for cause, and yet a good HR professional is looking ahead and realizing that in the state that you're in, you cannot demonstrate clearly that you have treated this employee fairly simply with documentation. And so you're having to be the bad guy and say, nope, we're going to do this the right way so that we can protect you, we can protect the company, and we can demonstrate a pattern of effective management, even though in their mind, this employee totally screwed up and made like they feel totally justified. So yeah, there's a lot of consultation. You start to understand, though, state by state how to navigate it. But anytime we had a layoff, for example, you think about the size of the layoff. You think about the requirements to file depending on the size. You have to file to the labor board. You got to do all these things. We were very close with in-house and external counsel all the time, navigating the compliance side of HR.
That's interesting. Also, that like you mentioned, from state to state it varies. We have an international listener base. I'm guessing HR. I mean, internationally, I mean, that's huge variation, right? Like the
yeah.
idea that, yeah.
Yes, you mean from like international, like visa employees coming to work,
Right. Either like
or,
how
or international
right.
presence.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Like Coca-Cola. Like,
yeah. It's very complicated. So when you do, when you do a international move, right, and the payroll laws change, the employment laws change, I mean, the
Time off
taxes
changes, yeah.
change, right? Everything changes, and so you have to be very, very, yeah, you've got to be very careful, or you expose yourself to a lot of risk. And to that point, you're starting to see less of the global expat presence actually because of that cost and that risk, and more of a local talent. So 20 years ago, your big government contractors and your big consulting companies, like you would travel the globe, right, as an American citizen all over. But more and more, because of cost and risk, you're seeing them build up talent pipelines locally, to navigate some of that.
That's interesting. Katie, your experience, like you said, when you started working, you were doing HR, essentially an HR role, but you didn't have the HR training. How did you feel about the legal aspects of it?
I went into it thinking that I knew a lot more than I did. And Arizona at the time had just implemented, Arizona has mandated sick pay for everybody across the board. If you're part-time, if you're full-time, you get a certain amount of sick leave. So they were working through all the legal implications of that. In my current role, USU, obviously they're a very large university, and they have in-house legal counsel that is there to advise policy and things like that. And when you get into a company of that size, you have different offices that are going to that employees are going to go to as an HR function, but they're going to go back to legal. So you have Title IX that is going to, any complaints that come through Title IX or violations that come through Title IX, they're going to contact the Title IX officer. The Title IX officer is going to, or they'll do their HR director, then they'll do their HR director will, they'll escalate it to Title IX. Title IX will escalate it to legal. So you get into a lot more steps when you get into a larger company, which is okay because then you've got a paper trail, a very firm paper trail that you're following. But in my working with the Society of Human Resource Management, the Salt Lake chapter and the Central Utah chapter both have someone that sits on their board as legal representation that advises the board and by extension their members on different things that are happening within the state. So they really try to make sure that anything that's coming down the pipeline as far as legislation is concerned, or different laws, as different laws are changing, like for example, they just started saying that organizations can't do non-compete clauses anymore. And so there's been a lot of concern about how do we do that? And so they have a couple times a year that they will do a professional development just with that legal board member. But they also do like an employment law symposium where they break it down into different sections. They do a benefits symposium. So they're constantly trying to make sure that the members that are paying to be part of this association are getting the best information possible. And so that has been my experience with it, is looking at the different contracted law firms in Utah, because there are a lot of employment law firms in the state of Utah. And we also, the Christensens, have a benefit of having a family member that does employment law. And so we have been able to, there have been a couple of times that I've called her and been like, I have a question about this. Is this something that can be done? And so, but yeah, that has been primarily my experience. And again, I've worked for smaller organizations, so um,
Right.
I feel like I have much less experience than Sam, and that
No,
he
that's
he
still
has a
good
lot more
insight.
knowledge
And
than I do.
said like universities will have a different structure than even large companies like what Sam has experience with. But uh, well, along the lines of large companies, then Sam, you've worked at a couple different large companies at this point. Are HR strategies, how you do big pictures, development of teams or the environment of the whole company, is that dependent on like the vertical, on the company itself, or are there like HR strategies that just work across the board?
Yeah, effective HR, I think effective HR strategy is um, understanding the business strategy and then developing a people strategy that supports that. Obviously, the foundation of compliance and making sure that like you're not doing anything illegal, that people are treated fairly, but the design of your benefits, the design, you can't have it all, right? You can't have a 10% 401k match and be 90th percentile in pay in the market and have a bonus structure that's like, unless you're one of these cash heavy tech companies, you have limited
Right.
resources. And so the HR's strategy needs to be to put together the best mix to drive engagement and drive employee morale and the best optimal experience that augments the business's strategy, right? They have growth plans, they've got margins they're going after, they have to they have long-term visions that they aspire to, and you should be able to double click off that and see an HR strategy, in my opinion, right? And if HR is solving for HR, it's failing, in my opinion. So often HR will measure activity, right? They feel really good about compliance only things, right? We had this amount of participation in an engagement survey, or and we feel really good about that, right? And we measure that. That's kind of HR for HR activity that means nothing. Honestly, it doesn't actually drive any sort of inherent value. Where HR really finds its sweet spot is when it's got enough business acumen to design a people strategy, and that's everything from developing the leaders and putting together the right package and engaging and training and coaching. Like, it's the whole thing. It has a lot of legs, but that augments off of and is a double click from the business strategy. It enables it. And when HR gets to that point, the business wants more of it, right? They're not trying to like navigate around it, and it's the necessary evil to go through. It's the partner, the shared partner, to get you to a destination, and it's a total game changer in businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it is like a paradigm shift as far as saying like HR is the necessary evil of making sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's,
Right.
versus the paradigm through which HR makes sure that we are sustainable and that our team wants to continue to grow with us, and all the positive things that can come with a business. So
right.
Okay,
I find that really
good
interesting. I find that really interesting. I just had a survey from my work about our benefits package, and they had a bunch of different questions, and some of this stuff was, did you know you had this benefit or not have this benefit, basically. And they wanted to know, answers there. Most of the answers were also click here and then write an answer along with it, so they could get better feedback. But I mean, the current company I work for is actually really people strong, like people smart. They want to treat their employees the best they can, and I definitely think that is that's one of their main goals, like in their mission statement, is how they treat their people. But
and
but I definitely see that through HR.
Yeah, that's a great example, because on the alternative is, I've seen HR departments that like to solve for themselves. They go and find a really new flashy platform or a cool new performance management system that feels cool to them, but it's not actually solving the actual issue. It's not enabling it's not driving engagement. So that's a great example. An HR department says, what is actually the benefits that our employees want? And then let's go after those. We can't get everything, but we're going to go after those because that's the voice of customer, right? That's what they feel is most important. But often HR can go and solve for itself and gets really excited about. Here's an example. I won't say the company that I worked for, but I'll just say an operations heavy manufacturing company went out and probably spent $500,000 on a AI driven, really sophisticated engagement survey tool that sends prompts that are predictive based on initial inputs, right? And it sends prompts, and it's this really cool, exciting, really progressive idea of AI driven effect driving change in leadership. The problem is half the employee base doesn't even use a cell phone, right? Half the employee base is working on a manufacturing line. And so HR in a vacuum went out and solved for a really cool flashy thing when the nuts and bolts option would have been just fine had they got it right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that is a good point. Okay, I've got 2 or 3 more points to ask about before we wrap up here. But Katie, I know at the beginning of the podcast you talked about kind of the COVID change in the workforce. You already gave some numbers, but what are the, how does HR enable the current change in kind of work scene from being the old traditional model of 9 to 5 every day, regardless of whether or not you need to be there, to kind of more of a forward-thinking hybrid or even fully remote workspace that I think a lot of companies have adopted now. What is HR's role in that?
Yeah, I think that this is the remote work argument is really an area where HR bridges the gap between what the employees want and what the employees are accomplishing, and what the old way of doing things and the C-suite level maybe wants it to be. What we're seeing right now from the numbers that are coming out, there is an economist that works at Stanford University named Nick Bloom. He's been studying remote work since the 1980s, and he releases every month work from home research, where they take the surveys that they're doing, they compare it to the U.S. Pulse survey from the census, and they are monitoring all the time what's taking place in the workplace right now. And what they're seeing is that the structured hybrid model is really emerging as the most popular, and that employees want to be the majority of them want to work in a structured hybrid model, but a lot of them still want to work fully remote, and they're willing to take up to an 8% pay cut to continue working remote, which means that if your company can't provide it for them, they're willing to go somewhere else and get paid less to have the flexibility and autonomy to work the hours that they need to maintain work-life balance, or to live where they want to live, because housing prices are ridiculous right now. So during COVID, we saw a lot of people move to a home base, and most of them are living 50 miles or more away from where their company is now. So what I always tell people is that the favorite part of my job is giving HR managers, HR directors, the ammunition that they need to go back and fight for the employees to maintain this work-life balance, and to maintain the either hybrid or fully remote model. And so that's really where we've seen. And the other thing is that what we're seeing right now is that training is becoming more prevalent. Like a lot of companies are starting to train for remote work. So they're training their employees how to work remotely. They're training their leaders how to work remotely and how to lead the remote teams. But that only came after there was a lot of survey data that came out and said, hey, look, 74% of the workplace feels that they are not adequately prepared for post-COVID work, for like the post-COVID work environment. And so I think that that is a big part of HR right now too, is ensuring that those that are working remotely have the adequate training that they need to be able to be successful in what they're doing and to maintain company standards. Because there are still, key performance indicators that they need to hit. There are still goals that they need to hit. And so finding that balance between training and making sure that everybody's hitting their numbers, but keeping the employees that want to have that flexibility and autonomy is really going to be a big part of HR in the coming months, especially.
Yeah, I really like that insight, and I love, and I think that's been a kind of a theme of the podcast generally for the however long we've been doing this, which is years. Just there's research into this. Let's dig into it and find what best answers the question here. But Sam, you've been HR manager, HR director from pre-COVID, and now multiple years post COVID lockdowns. What are the changes you've seen, and how do you manage that in the different companies you've been in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Any HR professional, well, any manager will never forget the COVID years, and but wants to, especially those with operations employees that could not work remote and cannot work remote. Right? You have the entire, I don't know how large. Think of all the distribution centers in the United States, all the manufacturing facilities, right? All the drivers. Pick your industry, and you have a large majority of the employee population that can't work remote. And so a lot of companies were faced with tough decisions, which is, do we have the haves and the have-nots in our company culture? And the companies that have mature leadership to navigate those discussions and still maintain a feeling of equity and opportunity have been able to do that. Those that don't have to kind of pick or choose. And often it's, well, then everybody needs to be in the office, right? Because everybody's got to be the same, right? Especially companies like the company I'm with today, 80, maybe 70 or 80% of 10,000 employees are sitting working long overtime hours to make sure the product is produced, distributed, and arrives at a customer. And so it takes a little bit more than the flip of a switch to feel good about enabling everybody to work from home. You have to ensure your systems, your ways of working, and kind of the culture is firmed up enough to make that shift and not totally break that employee value proposition apart, right? And the best model is a model where, one, you've got to help leaders move away from measuring activity. It's not about activity. You're measuring output. You're measuring outcomes. And sometimes you got to completely shift your measurement tools, even your performance management tools for some roles, to really assess value and outcomes versus activity. And then I would say the other, because if you do, right, if you're measuring outcomes, no longer does it matter when you get in or out, right? It matters that the job is done. But what's required is you have the measurement capability to assess that. In the traditional mindset, I know that you're working because you're here. I know that you're working because you're in your seat. It's a total different mindset to have the confidence and trust and have established the expectations with an employee to be able to manage them totally remote. No, like, do you have the tools to actually assess that? So what matters is intentionality, right? I have seen remote teams fall apart because a leader wants to manage a team like they do in person, but they're all remote, right? You have to completely change your management style and what you're measuring and how you lead if you're going to do that effectively. And that's probably part of what Katie trains leaders on. So yeah, to your original question, now that I've gone way down a rabbit hole, I've seen every different kind of pivot, but I would say that why I champion a more progressive outcomes-based model of work is because it drives an inclusive workplace, right? Women often and working mothers are severely limited, or working or fathers, depending on how roles are, in a home. But a parent, often working mother, is at a disadvantage in the current workforce if it's a traditional 9 to 5 in the office. You open yourself up to an entire capable, amazing population of talent when you have shifted your mindset to be outcomes based, and allowing, for example, a woman working from home to pick hours that work for their at home life and still be able to produce. So in order to ensure that's fair, you've got to measure it differently, and that's hard, right? Moving a 10,000 person company to be that sophisticated is moving a big steamboat. It takes a lot of time, and isn't a flip of a switch.
Yeah, those are great points.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Katie.
We can be friends, Sam, because that is exactly what we teach people. The funny thing is that when you're in a traditional office setting, like in cubicles and everybody's, in the office, you can't guarantee that they're doing work just because they're in the office. They could be looking at Facebook all day long, and their heads down time. I think they figured that the average heads down time in an office setting was really like 3.5 hours. And when people are working remotely and they're trained how to do it properly, and those that are leading them are trained to do it properly, and look at performance rather than how much time they're on, the screen, or measuring mouse movement, which some companies do. If your mouse doesn't move and so on, then clearly you're not working. But when they start doing that, people will invest more time in their work overall. And when you can get someone that is dedicated to having that more progressive mindset, overall it just becomes easier to maintain company culture.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea that that the ways that we can measure these things evolve, and we're more capable, and it is challenging. So so I'm sure that many companies, this is just, it's a matter of evangelizing correctly, and making sure that the right metrics are being given, and that people feel enabled to be able to figure this out in a meaningful way. So, okay, 2 other things, and then we'll wrap up. Real quick, this is, I think, a relatively short, but Sam, actually Cameron and Katie, we've all interviewed people before. And for me as an engineer, I know in interviews, the thing that always mattered to me was just like, I had other interviews, but to me they were all kind of a joke until I got to the engineer interviews, and then like they're asking specific like questions about which algorithm, how do you solve this, what is but that's not the case for all, obviously most jobs. It's not like you can go through and make sure that you have the exact knowledge you need. So a lot of HR people are on the hook for interviewing, giving meaningful interviews. So what does that look like? What does a meaningful interview look like? And how, as a lot of people that listen to us are younger, looking to get into the job market, what do you recommend when they're interviewing with an HR professional? How do they stand out?
Sure. So I would say that as everybody on this call knows, hiring for technical ability only may work. It could be catastrophic as well, right? And on the other hand, there's a lot of fluffery in behavioral based questions, right? Like it's rarely very effective in measuring actual ability. And so where I like to embed myself is in leadership roles, right? Anytime there's a role that I'm hiring for that is going to have a team, I'm specifically asking questions about one's ability to effectively lead, develop teams. Because Carl, as you know, as everyone on the call knows, the further up you go, the technical, generally speaking, but your technical depth starts to matter less and less. It's got to be there, but it's not the leading thing. It's your ability to delegate and manage and develop people to do the jobs really effectively. And so where I think people can excel and stand out in interviews, regardless of, I've interviewed for engineers and, VPs of FP&A and finance and sales executives and entry-level HR personnel and everything in between. What really stands out often to, and do you have a follow-up question, Carl? I see your mic is up.
Oh, okay. No,
I'll finish this thought. Really sorry. I'll finish the thought. I think for anybody, yeah, no worries. For anybody interviewing, especially early talent coming out of school, is to focus on your value creation as opposed to your technical ability, right? Like, you've got to have that and demonstrate technical ability. It's table stakes, but what? Like, what was the thing that was developed or created or produced, or what efficiency did you drive? Like, what was created as a result of your technical ability? Often you see that in resumes. It's like, I do this task and this task and this and this and this. Well, so does everybody, right? And so instead in your resume design and in your interviews, what value was created? What problem did you solve? Show that mental agility, right? That's what we look for in today's world for talent.
Yeah, that's awesome. The one thing I was thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking about the fact that I said that, and it is the case that most engineers, especially computer scientists, they view the interviews to get to the engineering interview as kind of as fluff.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in my works, like in my day-to-day work, yeah, like we hire very capable engineers in my company. But not always do we get one that can work well with others and communicate well and lead a team. And so like it's real easy to check, like to make sure that, they actually have good computer science knowledge. It's a whole nother thing to be able to be like, and they can talk to people and not offend people.
Right. So. And exactly. And delegate and work. And they're a future leader, right? They could replace you when you become, the head CIO or whatever, Carl, is your next role, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Last question, and we can all kind of chime in on this. Well, Sam's going to have the most insight, but Cameron, I know you're in the technology space, and Katie, maybe you have some insight of this as well. Sam, you already mentioned AI. So AI is a big part of the technology scene right now. What technologies are out there, and what developing technologies are there that can help the HR professional?
Yeah, I'll give this a quick answer. So there are so many platforms. It feels like I get a call from a vendor every day on some new engagement platform and interface, or incentives-based reward system, or reporting and data visualization dashboard, or right. There are so many. And so HR in large companies often has as technical a staff as any software team, right? Because they're actually developing, they have UX capabilities, they're driving insights, and when there's a change needed, they're working back end to actually develop those changes. And so those are all there. I would say I think the most progressive is AI. You think about talent acquisition. AI can skim through, if you tell it what you're looking for in terms of skills and words and phrases and capabilities and experiences, it can comb through, exponentially higher, faster, less biased resumes, right, in that review for talent, and get through a first wave, especially for your high volume roles, right, where you're looking really just for core competencies. And AI can do a lot of tier 0, tier 1 HR solutioning, right? We have a system in our chat bot where employees can just simply type in, remind me how to find my payroll or my last paycheck, right? You can give it any question, and the more questions our employees are feeding it, the more sophisticated it gets. So I tested it out a few weeks ago, and I asked, tell me what our tuition reimbursement program is. And I asked it, I asked it about where can I find my most recent paycheck, and I asked it some pretty nuanced like employee handbook question, right? That's like dry beat HR, policy stuff. And surprisingly, it found all of them for me. So what does that mean? Like, what that means for HR professionals is that there are roles, if you are so pigeonholed, right, and you're a lifer in a particular kind of role, that it's very possible that if you don't upskill and you learn new skills, and you could be outsourced very, very quickly. So it's exciting, but it's also it's a tale to the wise, right? Like, and that same application works in IT, right? That same application works, name your function of the business. There's a lot of finance functions where that exists as well. So I'll just share maybe the most fascinating example of technology I saw and read about recently was a large global company, I won't say the name, but had a model of predicting one's flight risk, meaning they're leaving their level of urgency on leaving the company based on like 30 different inputs on a survey. And they got it so precise. It was with like 98% certainty that somebody would leave the company within a certain amount of months, that they could proactively address those things, and they were dead on, right? Like, and so you get these trends and this level of data integrity to predict someone's flight risk because of their financial situation, because of there's a lot of personal data that goes into those models. It's really fascinating, right? And HR can get pretty dang sophisticated if they get to that level. Now, the companies I work for have not had that kind of modeling in their predictive HR analytics, but it's a really fascinating concept.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Awesome. Katie, any insight?
So everything, I agree with everything that he just said. I also think that, AI is obviously going to go beyond HR. I think that it should be utilized a lot more because it's time saving. When I get ready to do a proposal or an abstract for a presentation or anything like that, I'll go to Chat GPT and be like, I'm going to do a presentation on this. What should I say? It helps me get past the barrier of starting. So I think you're going to see it used a lot more. And in fact, our team, we have our own AI that like just specific to our team, where we can go and ask it anything about the remote online initiative or research that we've done or things like that, and it will pop out and answer. So we're actually right now, our team is applying for grants to do AI education for businesses. So to teach AI education.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think it's going to become more the norm than with.
Yeah, I think people,
cautiously.
sorry, go ahead, Katie.
No,
Right.
cautiously. I was
Yeah,
just going to say, we don't want it to take over the world, but
I think the training in it is very important, because tools need to be leveraged correctly in order to produce the outcome that you want, right? You could take a hammer and build a house, or you can take a hammer and break down a house. So let's make sure we train correctly. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, this has been great. I really appreciate the insights that we've had. Sam, any final word on AHR? Any Toby quote that you like fire off at the end?
Oh no, gosh, I have too many, but it would probably be an appropriate scene from The Office, so I'll leave it at. I think maybe my most satisfying moments as an HR professional is when I hear the business leader and the employee say to me, right, how I completely turned their opinion of what HR is, right? Like they because of their interaction with me and helping them solve a problem and actually be progressive about it and being able to articulate their business strategy and get them to it and hear them say back to me something like, gosh, we wouldn't have been able to do that literally without you. And that's like that hero moment, like, hey, this is worth it. This is really exciting. So that's the goal.
Yeah. So someday, Sam, you'll star in a movie where you are the hero and the HR person's the hero.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's definitely what we need. And Sam, I just wanted to apologize for some of those calls. Just so but yeah.
Katie, any final word?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, I'm speaking for Cameron as well, though Cameron often has insights that I don't have, but I assume that Cameron learns along with me in some cases anyway. But I appreciate Sam's insights and Sam's experience, and Katie, yours as well. And I apologize. I should know my sister-in-law's job, but to be fair,
Nobody
my
knows
wife.
what I do, apparently. So.
Yeah, but my wife still tells people I work on
failed
computers, so whatever that means.
The family. So yeah, but yeah, thank you. No, I've learned a whole bunch as well, which is great. I love learning. That's the whole purpose of this podcast, right? So
That's right. For the Tasmanian
no.
listeners, Dan, we have Tasmanian listeners. So those that didn't get the opportunity to learn about HR in Tasmania have now learned it from Sam. So and Katie. But anyway, thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Katie. We'll be back again next podcast. So join us then. See ya.
Thanks.